Hello everyone and welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel, and we continue with Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, chapter 7. This one is called The Way of the Moon. Now, apologies for my low energy. I'm going through something, but we'll get through this together. Yesterday I sounded like, Darth Vader went to yeshiva. Luke, I am your Abba. Search your feelings, my son. It was hilarious. But anyway, we'll do this. Okay, so let's get to it. The Way of the Moon. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Gamliel, Rav Ishmael, Rav Elazar ben Arach, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, that's our guy, and Rabbi Akiva, his student, were expounding the laws of the Molad of the moon. The new moon. So we have the A-team of sages and Torah scholars. Can you imagine to be like a fly on the wall over there? So as we discussed in the first two chapters, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Gdol Hador, meaning he was the Grand Master of the order of that generation. His student was Rabban Gamliel, and just to note, there were a few Rabban Gamliels. They came every other generation. Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, also his student. The next generation was Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, and his students, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, we discussed. So now the Radal says that although in Pirkei Avot it says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus was the greatest of the students of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's writing this, and this is a sign of his humility, because he put himself at the bottom of the students of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Since Rabbi Eliezer placed himself, like I said, last over there, so, and then of course before his own students. So these titans, it says, were expounding the laws of the Molad of the moon. They said, "The Holy One, blessed be he, spake one word, and the heavens were created as the residence of the throne of his glory, as it says, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made." Psalms 33:6. The Holy One, blessed be he, spake one word. And what was this one word that the Holy One, blessed be he, spake? The Radal goes on to reference Otiot de Rabbi Akiva, specifically the letter Resh. Otiot Rabbi Akiva, we discussed it in the previous series. Rabbi Akiva goes through all the letters, gives their meanings. There are several different midrashim. There's at least three. You have to look at all three of them to get a complete picture. So, right, okay, so we discussed that. So let's read directly from the midrash itself, because here in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, they reference it, okay? But I opened up the book, I read what it said so you could get a clearer picture. Reish. Okay, this is Rosh, the head, literally means the head, Rosh, but figuratively it means the leader. This is the Holy One, blessed be he, who is the head of all the world and the end of the entire world. Rosh lekol haolam v'sof lekol haolam. He calls the first generations and the last generations, as written in Isaiah 41:4. Who worked and did? Who calls the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, am first, and with the last ones I am he. And now that we have established that God is the Rosh, the head, we will see what was said. You always need context. Now there are several meanings and correlations with the letter Resh, right? It looks like that, Resh. And every time there's another example, the word used for the other examples are davar acher, meaning they'll give an example and then davar acher, another example or another thing, another word in this regard. So Rosh, davar acher, another meaning, another understanding to Rosh. There is no Rosh, no head, but the word of the Holy One, blessed be he, who is called Rosh. And through his word, he has created, this one word, he has created 7 firmaments, reki'im, and all the heavenly hosts, apologize, and all the heavenly hosts inhabiting them. With one word, he created the 7 realms, the 7 reki'im, firmaments, and all the heavenly hosts within them. How do we know that his word is called Rosh? Because it's written in Psalms 119, 160. The beginning of your word is true. In Hebrew is Rosh Dvarcha Emet. Rosh, the head, the first, the beginning. Dvarcha, your words, are true. Dvarcha. Okay? Now, we'll pay attention to the language in a second. Now, how do we know that from here 7 firmaments have been created? Because it's written in Psalms 33, 6. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and with the breath of his mouth all their host. Bidvar Hashem shamayim na'asu, uberuach piv kol tziva'am. The word, just one word. Heavens, though, are plural. Shamayim na'asu. If it was one, it would be na'asa, na'asu. Okay? In other words, more than one. This is where we get the 7. And these are the 7 firmaments that were created in one utterance. Furthermore, it was not written by the words of the Lord, Divrei Hashem, but by the word Bidvar Hashem. One word, not by the words of, by one word, the heavens, plural, were created. And how do we know that all the heavenly hosts were created from this word? If we keep reading, same verse, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, by the word singular, the heavens plural, and with the breath of his mouth, as in as it was coming out, first there is the word, then there is the breath, all their hosts, all one. And the heavens were created as the residence of the throne of his glory, as it said, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made. Same verse. So we already know that the heavens, 7 of them, were made in one utterance. But how about the residence or dwelling place of the throne of glory? 1 Kings 8:39. And you shall hear in heaven your dwelling place. V'ata tishma hashamayim, the heaven. Right? Hashamayim, shamayim again, it's also plural. Machon shivtecha. Lashevet is to sit. That's where we get the word yeshiva. Machon is your dwelling place. Hashamayim machon shivtecha. But in connection with the creation of the host of heaven, he labored with great labor. What? How come the creation of the heavenly hosts was considered great labor for God? Does God labor greatly? Wait for it. This is all for us, so you understand. The Radal brings forth Isaiah 40, verses 26. Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these, who takes out their host by number. All of them he calls by name, because of his great might and because he is strong in power, no one is missing. When we say heavenly hosts, we're talking about, again, because they were all as one, it's heavenly hosts, right? But we say heavenly hosts because of how we speak. Myriads and myriads, endless, countless, you cannot, and yet, who created these? Who takes out their host by number? All of them he calls by name. Each and every one of them has their own name. Because of his great might and because of his strong power, no one is missing. Isaiah 40, verse 26. So we see that the detail and the names, which if you pay attention to is in the verse and its context, there will be a time at the end that we will be able to see all of them. You will be able to see all of them because the veil is going to be lifted from our eyes and you're really going to see what's going on behind the scenes, right? The veil there right now is for our protection because you cannot behold these things and live. You're talking about a physical being trying to comprehend something. To see spirit, you can't see it with these eyes. It wouldn't work. So the reason this was considered labor is because all the heavenly hosts are tied directly to creation itself. As we discussed, every single grain of sand and blade of grass has a governing angel. Not to mention the nations and each and every one of us. Every one of us is born with their own guardian angel, an angel that he's almost like your witness. So he can, in the end, he will testify against you, for better or for worse. If you do good, he'll help you. If you do bad, he'll help you. Free will, that's up to us, right? So not only every person that was ever born has an angel, but every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every gust of wind, every leaf, everything has its own governing angel. God named them all. It's a big deal, right? Still not a big deal for God, but it's a big deal because, again, it comes down to creation. However, all these things were made for the sake of Israel, which is why so much thought and attention was put into it all. What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He blew with his mouth the wind and the breath of life, and all the hosts of heaven were created, as it said, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. Another reason why this would be considered laborious for God is because, right, it's how you say, is because there is a difference between speech and action. Look at how small this thing is, right? And so the heavens were created by his word, but his breath, that could be considered an action. Speech can also be considered an action, right? But the difference in this would be speech. I'm talking right now. Okay, now go blow out the candles. Okay, so that's an action, you see? Okay, so all the stars and constellations were created at the beginning of the night of the fourth day. One luminary did not precede the other except by the period of 2/3 of an hour, meaning the sun was created 40 minutes before the moon. Therefore, every motion of the sun is done with deliberation, and every motion of the moon is done quickly. Because the moon is trying to catch up, if you will, with the sun. Now, I know we discussed last week how the moon claimed that it came first based on the order of creation, and this is true. In other words, first it was evening and then it was morning. So even though the sun was created first, the moon comes first because it is placed first, and so on. Since the days always start with the night, meaning the moon, before the day, the sun. But here we see that although this is true, the sun was created 40 minutes before the moon. The next part is a complete mess and incorrect, both in the Hebrew and the English translation on Sefaria. At some point, I'm just going to stop saying this. I still mention it a few times here, but I don't know. Maybe I'll just stop saying it. I'll stop saying it, okay? If you have any questions, please, here's your Sefaria guide. However, in this, I'll let them have this text, since the text itself in the book doesn't make much sense, and even the commentaries say that there's an error in the next part. So this is the correct text. In other words, I rightfully translated this from the both books that I got. The course of the sun all the days of the year is the same as the moon does in a day. Excuse me. And the course of the sun all the days of the year is what the moon does in 30 days. Sometimes things happen due to the age of the texts, right? They get screwed up, misplaced, mistranslated, and both the Radal and the Maharzu say that there's no explanation to this one. So we'll take it, and we'll say awesome, and we'll move on. All the days serve for the beginning of the Molad, of the new moon. For the following series, the days are reckoned backward. At the beginning of the night, the fourth day, the beginning of the Molad, the new moon, was in the hour of Saturn, and the mnemonic is Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Moon, Sun, Saturn, in that order. So as it's moving forward, it also is like counting backwards. Every new moon cycle is 29 days, 12 hours, and 40 minutes. Exactly. Now bear with me. This next part is straight up info regarding the cycles of the order of the stars or the planets that we just mentioned. So we're just going to read it right through. After 3 years of the small cycle, the day and the next cycle revert to the beginning of the night of the third day, and the beginning of the Molad new moon, the Molad is the new moon, is in the hour of Venus. After 3 years in a small cycle, and the next cycle reverts to the beginning of the night of the second day. The beginning of the Molad is the hour of Jupiter. After 3 years in the small cycle, and so, you know what? Let's skip that. Mercury, Mars, Moon, Sun, and Saturn, right? So after 3 years of the small cycle, and the day of the next cycle reverts to the beginning of the night of the fourth day, when everything was created, the luminaries, the beginning of the new moon reverts to the hour of Saturn. So as it moves forward, we still count backwards. So far, so good? Okay. The great cycle of the moon is 21 years. This is when the moon returns to its original place of creation within Saturn at the eve of the fourth day of creation. Meaning it takes the moon 21 years to quote unquote catch up with the sun. Oddly enough, the Radal and other commentators keep using the term lachzor la'achorea, to go backwards. Now, we do, of course, take the sun into consideration in our calendar. We consider them both, as God had said in Genesis 1:14, they shall be for signs and for appointed seasons and for days and for years. But we go primarily according to the moon, as this was our first command as a nation in Egypt, like we discussed last week. God specifically told Aaron and Moses, Be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. Why? That's where it started. So if the moon is steadily moving backwards, when I say backwards, I mean it moves forwards, but it completes its revolutions at an earlier point from where it began, and yet times as we know it are moving forward. Hypothetically speaking, it would almost seem like there's a countdown here. I found this very interesting. And in order to know where we truly stand, you have to pay attention to all these details. However, I know we don't have it right because we're off count ever since the first exile, as it is today, like we said, for 164 years. We're 164 years in the future. And if you didn't hear this before, since the Babylonian exile, all the clocks in the world, meaning all the accounts and all the archives of every nation around the world, place the timeline at 164 years in the future, except for Israel. So like I said, we are closer to the end than we could possibly imagine, as in not only within our lifetime, but based on everything that has to happen in that small period. We're talking about, in your hamster's lifetime. How long do they live? Whatever. Not too long. Okay. So, based on the world events of these auspicious times, we can absolutely get an idea of how close we really are as we can observe prophecy unfold before our very eyes. We continue. It has 7 small cycles, each being 3 years. The total of the days of the lunar month is, like we said, 29 and a half days, 43 minutes, and 73 parts. Each constellation serves the day of the lunar month for 2 days and 8 hours. 3 constellations serve for 7 days. The chief, which begins on the new moon of the lunar month, is the same which concludes at the end of the lunar month. The mashlim, it says that's a word in Hebrew, that which concludes is referring to the day and a half and the 40 minutes that remain from the 28 days, right? It's 28 days. 28 days, but we get 29 and a half days and 40 minutes. So you have a day and a half plus 40 minutes. That's the completion, the mashlim. Okay, so we just read that the total days of the lunar month are 29 and a half days, 40 minutes. The moon became new at every molad, every new moon, once at night, and the next time by day. Meaning that if the molad, the new moon, happens during the day, then the following month it will happen at night, and so on. Day, night, day, night, day, night, or rather night, day, night, day. And as it is, and this is their sign, and it was evening and it was morning. Right? Day, what was it, 4? Yeah, or 1, 2, 3, all of them. Genesis 1:5, they bring over there. So as we know, when was the first molad? When did the first molad begin, the new moon? It began at night. Between the molad and the corresponding molad, the new moon and the corresponding new moon, in the ensuing year, there elapsed 4 days, 8 hours, and 876 parts. I know, there's a lot of technical things here, if you will. We just have to take that at face value because, again, science today corroborates that. So you know that what the sages wrote is true, but we're learning some of the behind the scenes, like I said, whatever I can share with you in this regard. So this count begins on the evening of the 4th day. And remember, that's the beginning. It's the evening. When is it in the west? The sages ask. When the sun goes in the south quarter, the moon goes in the north quarter. And when the sun goes in the north quarter, the moon goes in the south quarter. All the hours, serve for the beginning of the molad of the moon in a retrospective order, like we said, according to the order of Saturn, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter. The Maharzu says that the cycle of the moon, of the sun and the moon are not subject to one another. As we know, they have their own course, right? But rather cut through one another at a 5-degree angle. How would they know this? And so it is known that during the time of the new moon, the moon's trajectory is closest to the sun, and that within itself is a matter of the molad, the new moon. And by the way, I realize I haven't explained this yet, or actually I wrote this here, maybe I did explain it, right? Molad it comes from the word, why is it new moon? Molad comes from the word leida, birth, new, right? Molad, new moon, hence new moon. And like we read, when the sun is in the south, the moon against it will be on the opposite end in the north. And so, in the first year, at the beginning of the night of the fourth day, the beginning of the conjunction of the moon, the new moon, is in the hour of Saturn. The Maharzu says this all revolves around the calculations of 2/3 of an hour, meaning 40 minutes, like we discussed. Go out and investigate, and you will see that everything they're saying is perfect. In the second year, the beginning of the conjunction of the moon is in the hour of the moon. In the third year, Mercury. In the fourth year, Venus. In the fifth year, Sun. In the sixth year, Mars. In the seventh year, Jupiter. Okay, just it's the same. That's that same order. In like manner, for 3 times these hours serve at the conjunction of the moon retrospectively, forward yet backward retrospectively, until the expiration of the 21 years of the cycle. All the mazalot, the zodiac, which we learned about, the constellations, serve the moon by night from the 4 corners of the world, 3 in the north, 3 in the south, 3 in the east, and 3 in the west. The Maharzu says that these things are hidden, and there are many ways to look at it. One of which is that the new moon will go through each and every one of the zodiac signs, or perhaps that the cycle of the moon cuts through the constellations and is called the head of the Tanin and its tail. The Tanin, are we familiar? The Tanin can be seen in Genesis 1:21 on the 5th day of creation. Vayvara Elohim et hataninim hagdolim ve'et kol nefesh hachaya. And God created the great sea monsters. It's what's called sea monsters over here. In other words, they're not just sea monsters. Wait till we get to the 5th day. We'll get into this. Okay, all right. Anyway, these sea monsters were the Leviathan and his mate, whom God killed during creation, just the female, because the size and power, the sheer size and power that they were they to reproduce, if you will, the world would not be able to stand. But more on them when we get to the 5th day. Maybe. All the hours serve the moon by night from the 4 corners of the world. Excuse me, 2 in the south, 2 in the north, 2 in the east, and 2 in the west. In the hour in which it began to serve in the south, therein it finishes in the west, and so with all its circuits. So if you add up the 2 hours of each direction, you get 8 hours, and that's the 8 hours of night and 16 hours of day. This, of course, is referring to the shorter nights, as the longer nights is split 12 hours day and 12 hours night. Perfect sense. Thank you, sages. All the great luminaries of the stars, kol me'orei or hagdolim, this is what it says in Hebrew, not to be confused with. So, again, there's all the great luminaries of the stars, and there's the great luminaries, okay? There are 2 different things. Here we're talking about the great luminaries of the stars. Kol me'orei or hagdolim. These are the great luminaries of the stars. They're referred to in Ezekiel 32:8. That reads, all the bright lights in the heaven, I will darken them because of you, and I will cast darkness upon your land, says the Lord God. Kol me'orei or bashamayim. All of them, these are the stars in heaven. Akidrem alecha, I'll darken them because of you. Like I said, I'll give you darkness on your land. In Zohar Bereshit, These me'oreo, these great luminaries, reside on the right side. That's what they say. Now, if you recall, we discussed a few classes ago that all goes according to where the Mishkan was facing and where the temple was and is facing, and that is facing to the west. They're facing to the west. So based on where you're standing, based on if you're looking from the west to the east or east facing it to the west. So which is why it says all the great luminaries of the stars are situated in the south. What is the south? Within the Mishkan and the temple, you have the menorah, representing the great luminaries of the stars. And this is placed on the left side when you enter, meaning if you're actually entering it, north is to your right, right? South is to your left, even though it's on the left side. You get it. If you could Google the the placement of the temple vessels, right? And you'll see that when you go in before the veil going to the Holy of Holies, the menorah is on the south and the showbread is on the right. So menorah, representing the great luminaries of the stars, is placed on the left side when you enter, and since the whole thing is facing the west, whatever is to the left is actually on the south. All the great luminaries of the stars are situated in the south except for Ursa Major, which is placed in the north. So in Hebrew, Ursa Major is called Ha'eglah or Ha'agalah. Anyway, it's Ha'eglah, but I'll explain. Now this could be several things, one of which is the word Eglah or Agalah, which means cart, possibly even chariot, but not really. But most likely, like a modern day cart is called a Agalah. But most likely this is referring to Eglah, meaning Egel. So Eglah, heifer, but also the golden calf Egel, right? So the understanding is that this is a reference to Taurus. Exactly. So this next part is not complete, but don't worry, I got you. It's the Safaria thing. All the mazikin, all the pestilence, or those that do harm, which move in the firmament, and the angels who fell from their greatness and their holy place from heaven during the generations of Enosh. Enosh, not Enoch. Enosh, he was the son of Seth. When they ascend to hear the divine word from behind the veil, they are pursued with a rod of fire, and they return to their place. Very interesting stuff here, isn't it? Okay, so let's break it down. Are we all familiar with Jeremiah 1:14? Let's read that. And the Lord said to me, from the north, the misfortune will break. Misfortune, poorly translated, will break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. Vayomer Hashem Elai, the Lord said to me, Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. What is ra'ah? Ra'ah is wickedness, is bad, is evil. From the north, tipatach will be open. The evil will come from the north. Al kol yoshvei haaretz, all the inhabitants of the earth. This is speaking of both a physical and spiritual incursion, of course, because depending where you are, how north can you go, right? Whenever any army invaded Israel, in all of Israel's history, especially biblically speaking, and you can actually see this, it had always been from the north, be it Assyria, Babylon, Greece, Rome, whatever. They always came from the north. Why? Because on the right side of Israel, you have the Jordan River and there's a valley in between. So strategically speaking, even if you were marching your armies over from the east, which they did, let's say from Babylon, they had to go high above it where Syria and Lebanon are today, and then they would come down. So in other words, through the Galilee, through the Golan, through Shomron, Samaria, all the way to Judea, right? And then the way they left is exactly in the same manner. So, mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. So we're not only talking geographically speaking. So tzafon can also mean, so tzafon is north, right? Excuse me. The Hebrew tzafon, biblically speaking, can also mean, north, from up there. And here we just read that there are pestilence, mizikim. Lehazik is those that do harm. Harmful spirits, if you will, walking around in the firmament. God made them. They are there for a reason and for a purpose, and they will be unleashed in due time. What's the other word for tzafon? Where does that come from? Tzafon can also be read as tzafun, same exact spelling, which means concealed or hidden. Tzofin, same letters, just moving the vav, means code. And what was Joseph's name in Egypt? What did Pharaoh call him after he solved the dreams? He called him Tzafnat Pa'anach, or Pa'anach. Tzafnat, from tzofin, from code. Code, Pa'anach, lefa'anach, to solve. He called him the code breaker. That's what Joseph's name was. Tzafnat Pa'anach, code breaker. And also, where else do we have tzafon, or tzafun? Ba'al tzafon, from Exodus 14:2. Speak to the children of Israel and let them turn back and encamp in front of Pi Hachirot, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Tzafon. You shall encamp opposite it by the sea. Why did God put them opposite Baal Tzafon? Why? Because the scariest things, what do we fear most? Are that which we cannot see, which we cannot hear, which we cannot touch. The scariest things are that when people speak and they hit us each individually, right? There are people that are afraid of, like Indiana Jones, right? I hate snakes. He's afraid of snakes. Some people love snakes. They sleep with snakes. Some people do, okay? So what I'm saying is, when something is hidden in that sense, the way to really control a population with fear is to say something out there that is vague enough that each person should take it according to their own understanding. God even tells us how to think that this should not happen, okay? But if you want to take things for your own understanding, it can go either way. And when I say either way, is bad or worse. None of it is good. So if someone says something and it infiltrates me and it catches onto my deepest, darkest fears, I can't see it, I can't hear it, I can't touch it. The scariest things are that which speaks to all these fears that we have, each person according to their own worst nightmare. Like I said, according to your own understanding. Baal Tzafon was something very, very personal. The reason God brought Israel there was to show them that they're actually afraid of nothing. That whatever is in their mind, I tell you this today, whatever is in your mind, it cannot hurt you unless you let that fear sink in. Which is why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's like, wait a minute, wait a minute, who's in control here right now? It wants to take you off that. That severs your connection. That's when the fear will grab hold of you and your life will spiral out of control and you will make the worst choices based on fear. This is why God emphasized to Israel that they have not seen him, meaning God, but but they know that God is all. When you fear and revere the creator of all things, the master of the universe, meaning when you know that God created all things for your sake, which we are learning about right now. Everything we are doing right now is to strengthen your faith. God had a plan for every single thing. Everything, even the things you don't know about, God had a plan for your sake. And learning about it just should bolster that faith that he's got this. No fear. So if this happens, then fear should actually leave you as you focus on the only one that you should be concerned about, and that is your Maker. Psalms 118, start verse 4. Those who fear the Lord shall now say, for his kindness is eternal. That's it, I fear God. Nothing else scares me. From the straits I called to God. God answer me with the vast expanse. The Lord is for me. I shall not fear. What can man do to me? If we forget this, then read what David said. The Lord is for me with my helpers, and I shall see revenge in my enemies. There's some context for you, okay? Now you understand. Now, let's get back. If the ox is in the north, it means the spiritual north. Who channeled the ox? It was the heir of Rav. The golden calf was on its way to growing to become a full-grown ox, right? It started off as a calf. It actually manifested as a calf, and it started growing, and it was going to grow to be a full-grown ox. But Aaron, he saw it and he stopped it. He built it and he just grabbed whatever he had. He built an altar, said, this is for the Most High God, right? He broke its power because they were draining it from him, breaking its power, which was taken from him, and halting it right in its tracks. Now, I've taught on this one plenty of times. The Erev Rav who are on the side of the left, hence the ox of impurity, specifically because Joseph is the ox of purity. This is why Joseph has to defeat Esav, left on the left. Okay. So the ox of impurity can only draw its power from its counterpart on the right, in this case from the right side, which was Aaron on the side of the Kohen, because Moses was standing actually on the left side. Aaron and Moses, you have the Kohen and you have the Levi. The Levites are judgment, the Kohen is mercy. They knew they had nothing on Moses. Moses would have blinked at them and they would have been gone. So that's why, again, though, if you read the Zohar, the Rashbis was weeping when he said, "Oh, poor Aaron, you did not even know how to counter this. If he would have known, he would have known not to take it from their hands, to place it down, because he's the one that actually gave of his own power, because he didn't know." Anyway, pestilence does have permission to walk through the firmament, as we can see, as they themselves are agents of chaos and destruction. But we say agents as in they got a boss. But here we are speaking of specific angels, aren't we? Not just any dark angels. It says, but the angels who fell from their place in heaven during the days of Enosh. Who were these? Numbers 13:33. There we saw the fallen, the sons of Anak, descendants from the fallen. V'sham ra'inu et hanefilim. Lipol is to fall. Nephilim, the fallen. We saw the fallen, the sons of Anak, from the fallen, right? As in way back when. Hanefilim, Anakim. Now Rashi says, again, go to Rashi, your most basic commentator. Who are these Nephilim? Who are these fallen? These were Anakim, the sons of Shamchazai and Azael or Azazel, that fell from the heavens, Shenaflu min hashamayim b'imei dor Enosh. The giants, the children of Shamchazai and Azael or Azazel, who fell from the heaven during the days of Enosh. Now we know their names. And do we know, just to make sure, that Azael or Azazel and the Samach Mem, who you might know as Satan, are one and the same? I hope so, okay? Again, we know that every Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the Satan is silenced, right? That's the one day of the year he cannot open his mouth against Israel. Why? Well, because he does not have the ability to speak. That would not be fair, right? So what does God do, right? He's silenced because he runs after the goat, the Seir LaAzazel, which carries all the sins of Israel upon it. Aaron places his hands, boom, two exact same goats, one for sacrifice, one for Azazel. As written in Leviticus 16:26, and the person who sent off the he-goat to Azazel shall immerse his garments and immerse in his flesh in water, and after this he may come into the camp. Excuse me. So this is how we know. Sorry. I usually don't talk this much now, which is why it's getting worse. We will make it through this, I promise. These things need to be said. I don't care. So what happens during these times? The fallen angel, here's the Darth Vader coming in. The fallen angels begin to call upon the name of God. That's what we read. The fallen angels, and they teach men what to do. Now, how do they know the name of God? The fallen angels taught men at that time the names and how to use them, thereby controlling the world around them, but in a complete physical and ultimately despicable way. The thing is, since they fell, they became impure, and so something that is impure cannot call upon the name of God. But we know that everything comes from God, because God creates all things, right? We got that already. So what did they teach them exactly? All the names of impurity, the darkness, the polar opposite of everything that was holy. And these names have power. So Adam, Seth, Enoch, Methuselah, and Noah all had this information as well, but from the side of the light. Again, a lot of the things that I cannot share with you here are from the books that these guys had. I'm not talking about the book of Enoch, talking about the book that Adam actually received from a different angel. It has everything that I'm explaining here with the other names of the governing angels, which gives you basically the ability to control the world around you in a positive manner. I mean, like I said, don't touch it. Don't even go there, because then no one alive is there today that they should dare or feel entitled enough to go there. So when do all these fallen angels, which we just read, ascend to hear the divine word from behind the veil? This would be on Rosh Hashanah, of course, the day of judgment for all the world. Probably the favorite day of the accuser, because this is his time to shine, so to speak. How do we know this? The book of Job, chapter 1. Now the day came about, and the angels of, it says, Vayavo b'nei ha'elohim, literally means the sons of God, came. Vayehi hayom vayavo b'nei ha'elohim li'yatzev al Hashem, right? The sons of God came to stand around the Lord, and the adversary too. Vayavo gam hasatan betocham. So like we said, Satan, Satan, it's a title. It's from the word lehastin, to accuse. So people can be a Satan for one another. God can even be a Satan for whoever, right? But ha-Satan, the Satan, that's just this one dude that we're talking about. So the adversary too came among them. The Lord said to the adversary, "Where are you coming from?" And the adversary answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro in the earth, walking in it." Meaning, where you dropped me off way back when, right? Why did they get dropped back then? I think I discussed it, but it's in the book of Jasher. Sham Chazai and Azael came to God after God created man. Said, this is where we read in Psalms 8, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" And God said, "Well, you think you guys could do better?" They're like, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, boom, see ya." And that's what, in a nutshell, that's what happened. Now the Lord said to the adversary, "Have you paid attention to my servant Job? For there is none like him on the earth, a sincere and upright man, God-fearing and shunning evil." And the adversary answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God? For nothing. Haven't you made a hedge around him, his household, and all that he has on all sides? Aren't you maybe, being really good to him, which is why he fears you? You have blessed the work of his hands, and of his livestock has spread out throughout the land." Wealthy guy. "But now stretch forth your hand and touch all that he has. Will he not blaspheme you to your face?" Now the Lord said to the adversary, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only upon him do not stretch forth your hand." Now the adversary left in the presence of the Lord. We know the story, right? It says, "Okay, Satan, I'll hear you out. Go do your thing." I mean, who's outsmarting who here, right? Now we have also learned that this is the same Job who was one of Pharaoh's 3 advisors, along with Bilam, whose son, along with Bilam, whose sons brought about the golden calf. Yanis and Yambres, those were Bilam's sons. Okay, they brought around. So Bilam, and who was Bilam? He was the grandson of Lavan, who tried to kill Jacob. So family feud going on here back for generations. And also the other advisor was Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. So this was the same Job. While Jethro was expelled from Egypt for speaking against Balaam's plan to kill all the firstborn males, right? That was Balaam's plan. What are we going to do? Kill them all. Jethro's like, "No, we should absolutely not do that. Get out of here, you." He went back and he became Kohen Midian, right? The high priest of Midian. And Job said, "Yeah, whatever the king decides, that's good by me," right? Meaning he didn't choose anything, but he didn't disagree with the king either. So an accomplice nevertheless. Okay. Anyway, let's go on. And while Israel were, there's just too much. And while Israel were leaving Egypt, the adversary was nowhere to be found. Why? Because at the time, he was busy afflicting Job. This took place during that time. Now, if you ask, but wait just a doggone minute, Tamir. You said that they came to God on Rosh Hashanah, which is in Tishrei. But we clearly know that Israel left in Nisan, on Erev Pesach. What? Great question, you. Excellent. To which I will answer, the judgment is proclaimed when? On the day of judgment, which covers the entire year. So it took place later on, this entire story. Excuse me. And as we can see, Job's story goes on for a while, right? First he lost all his possessions and then his kids and so on and so forth. And it was indeed God who steered Satan's attention onto Job. Have you looked at this awesome guy? Look how amazing he is in all the land. In order to test him personally, correct him for his past sins, and distract the Satan from accusing God's firstborn son Israel. Go there. I'm taking care of my kids right now. Now, if you may have another question, okay, as to why is God choosing favorites while seemingly punishing those who are not Israel, I say to you, is the master of the universe not perfectly just? Has he not already tried us in exactly the same manner? Has he not directed Satan's attention upon our father Abraham and that which he loved most? Now pay attention to the language. It is identical. The book of Jasher. And the day arrived when the sons of God came and placed themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came with the sons of God before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence thou comest this? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up it and down it. Meaning, where you put me, just doing my job. And the Lord said to Satan, What is thy word to me concerning all the children of the earth? And Satan answered the Lord and said, I have seen all the children of the earth who serve thee and remember thee when they require anything from thee. Just like he said to Job, it's the reason you're good to him is because, the reason he fears you is because you take care of him. And when thou givest them the thing which they require of thee, they sit at their ease and forsake thee, and they remember thee no more. Hast thou seen Abraham, the son of Terach, who at first had no children, and he served thee, and erected altars to thee whenever he came, and he brought up offerings upon them, and he proclaimed thy name continually to all the children of the earth. And now that his son Isaac is born to him, he has forsaken thee. He has made a great feast for all the inhabitants of the land, and the Lord he has forgotten. For amidst all that he has done, he has brought thee no offering, neither burnt offering, no peace offering, neither ox, lamb, nor goat, and all that he killed on that day, on the day his son was weaned. Even from the time of his son's birth till now, being 37 years, right? This is before the binding. He built no altar before thee, no brought anything on any offering, and so on and so forth. And the Lord said to Satan, Hast thou thus considered my servant Abraham? He's like, let's pour some gasoline on this fire. This is what God is doing. Hast thou considered my servant Abraham? After he said all this. For there is none like him upon the earth, a perfect and an upright man before me, one that feareth God and avoideth evil. As I live, were I to say to him, bring... HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are you saying? Were I to say unto him, bring up Isaac thy son before me, he would not withhold him from me. Much more if I told him to bring up a burnt offering before me from his flock or herds. In other words, God's saying, listen, I don't need him to give this to me. I know the man. I know the man. Everybody knows the man. He doesn't need to give these things to me because he already proved himself to me. But here, this one's for you, but it wasn't for him. It was actually for Abraham. It was for us and all of the universe. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Speak then unto Abraham, as thou hast said, and thou will see whether he will not this day transgress and cast aside thy words. So this conversation took place where? On Rosh Hashanah, which is why we read about it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The binding, however, the binding of Isaac actually took place on Yom Kippur, because that event is what shielded Israel for eternity. See how that works? Okay. Now, do we recall on creation the second day, the teaching, creation the second day, we discussed that he has a scepter of fire in his hand? Because we did. And I said, and I quote, because I copied and pasted my words, this scepter is specifically for the angels, but we'll get to that. We're getting to it. And a veil is spread before him. This would be that. And when they ascend to hear the divine word from behind the veil, the Radal references Masechet Chagiga, which says that like the ministering angels, they too know of things to come. Ministering angels know of things to come. These are beings outside of space and time. They already also see everything. And so do Satan and his buddy over there. They see things to come based on what? On what they see. You see, meaning constellations. Okay, good. Let those gears start turning right now. This is why they are so powerful, because they know what will be. And this is why Satanists, the NWO, and anybody else foolish enough to seek them out, like Balaam, seemingly have the upper hand, because they know things to come. This is what Balaam did. This is how he won all these wars. He would tell, he was a mercenary. Kings would, so will I defeat them? When will I? You will defeat them. You got to do this and this and that. In other words, he knows the outcome. If we knew the future, right, we could do anything, technically speaking. But this is not true about them having the upper hand, because what do we learn? Ein mazal Israel. Israel are not limited to what even the angels know is to come, because Israel are above it all and have the power to change the future, even though it seemingly might be set. And when Sham Chazai and Azazel attempted to move closer into the inner circle within the veil, they are pursued with the rod of fire, and they return to their place. There we go. Interestingly enough, this is alluded to in the Zohar Parashat Vayakel, that says the following: Come and see on Friday during the time of dusk, then one star from the north shines bright, and with its 70 others around it. And that one bright star smites the others, and they are all included within that one star, and that one consumes all 70. The one star that expands and becomes like a huge flame burning on all sides, that flame expands to 1,000 mountains and stands as a barrier around them. I gave you the extended version, so don't get distracted right now by what you don't need to get distracted. So first of all, we know that the 70 nefesh, the 70 nefesh meaning singular souls, nefesh beings, of the children of Israel, they're one. That's your bright star. We also know that the number of the nefesh are equal to the 70 nations. We also know, we also know that anytime Friday night is mentioned, that means that it is the time of the end of the 6,000 years. When is Mashiach coming? Be'erev Shabbat, on the eve of the Sabbath. On the eve of the Sabbath, on the eve of the Sabbath. Once the Sabbath ends, that's already the 7th day, the 7th millennia, right? That's when Mashiach comes, on the eve of, right before. So, let's continue. 10 days from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. This was a whole detour, but now let's enrich our understanding. 10 days, 21 hours, and 204 parts are the excess of the days of the solar year over the days of the lunar year, and the conception is introduced to equalize the days of the solar year with the days of the lunar year, and the sun and the moon begin their course at the new moon of Nisan, meaning in the end, they still have to be balanced. And this is where we know that there are 7 conceptions every 19 years. However, both the Radal and the Maharzu say that these 19 years are incorrect, and it would be cleared up in the chapters to come. So we'll wait. But that number, that the number to unify them is actually 13, which numerologically equals echad, 1. Aleph, Chet, and Dalet is equal 13. Sorry, thank you for sticking with me through this. It's difficult to get through, but we're doing this. We're almost there. Okay, so the sun goes before the moon, and it's tkufaz. Tkufaz is period. And Aries, the ram, begins to serve before it by day, which is the time of Nisan, by day, and all the constellations serve thereafter according to their order. The moon goes in the opposite direction, and Aries begins to serve before it by night, and all the constellations serve thereafter according to their order until the year of the small cycle, until the year of the intercalation comes round, the Ibul, until the year of conception. Incidentally, why do you think the children of Israel were commanded to take a lamb and slaughter it and eat it right at the peak of this season? Very specifically on that night. That's the peak of its supposed power. The Egyptians believed that their lamb god reigned, and God had to show everyone how wrong they were. Oh, that's your God? Eat it. Eat it. So when Israel slaughtered the lamb god, they broke the power as only they could do. This next part also is a mess in Safari. I'll do my best. When the month of conception comes around, it supersedes or thrusts aside the new moon of Nisan and remains at the new moon of Adar until the end of the small cycle. When the month of conception comes around, it supersedes again, it repeats only the new moon of Nisan, and it remains as the new moon of at the new moon of Tevet. And so until, meaning it goes backwards, right? Nisan, Adar, Tevet. Tevet, Adar, Nisan. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, Tevet. No, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan. Shvat, excuse me. And so until the 12th intercalated month comes around, when the sun and the moon are equal again at the commencement of the eve of the 4th day, in the 4th day of creation, in the hour of Saturn, in the hour when they were created. This is now coming full circle. Between each molad, a conjunction of the moon and the sun, there are only 36 hours, 40 minutes, and 73 parts. The moon does not disappear from the firmament, save for the twinkling of an eye, boom, for a split second, even though there were a full thread of light surrounding it in the east and in the west. So it doesn't completely disappear. It seems like it for a split second, and even then at that point, you cannot see it with your eye, which is why. The eye, here we go. The eye has not the power to see the moon until 8 large hours have elapsed. What are these large hours? This would be a 24-hour period. The small hours are the 12. The large hours are 2 hours for each large hour, either at the beginning of the molad, at the conjunction of the new moon, or at the end of the molad of the new moon. The number of the days of the lunar year are 354 days, a third of a day, and 876 parts. All the hours of a lunar month are 708 hours and 40 minutes. All the hours of a lunar year are 8,504 hours. So here are your calculations, which I don't see the value right now in getting into them, since they are pretty self-explanatory. All the constellations serve the molad of the moon. This we've already learned. And also the generations of children of men. Okay, so this we actually also have learned, meaning all except for Israel. We have already seen the example of God shifting the planets for the sake of Abraham. You can't have kids. Saturn, there you go. Children. Okay. We've also seen the sun set in the middle of the day when Jacob hit the spot. Vayifga b'makom vayelen sham ki ba hashemesh. It was the middle of the day. Now the sun sets. What? Which was a spot of Temple Mount. We've also seen the sun and the moon stand still in the sky for Joshua. Remember? Okay. He defeated the 31 Amorite kings. Shemesh begivon dom ve'yareach be'emek ha'elon halo hi ktuva besefer hayashar. The book of Joshua is referenced right over there in the book of Joshua. What about Psalms 147? He tells his words to Jacob, his statutes and his judgments to Israel. He did not do so for any nation, and they do not know the judgments. Hallelujah. In other words, Israel knows. Upon them the world stands. Psalms 148:6. And he set them up to eternity, yea, forever. He issued a decree which will not change. Two things now. One, this will be the sun, the moon, and stars. And two, Israel, who can overrule that which stands eternal. How could this be? Great question. The most powerful, look at me now, tool. The most powerful tool, if you will, in the universe is the Torah, because the Torah is the blueprint of the universe, of all of creation. Everything is in the Torah. Very specifically, the 5 books of Moses, even more specifically in the first chapter of Bereshit. Everything is there. Every secret you have ever wanted, it's all there. It is all there. Even more specifically in the first verse, even more specifically in the first word, even more specifically in the first letter. You can break it all down and you can get your answers everywhere and build on top of that, but we don't have eternity to learn Torah, unfortunately, in this lifetime. Soon we will, okay? But in the meantime, let's focus and get as much in as we can. Therefore, creation is subservient to Torah, obviously. Meaning creation is there for the subservients to be the keepers of the Torah. Where the first word in the Torah, Bereshit, at first, and the last word is Israel, right? In other words, those who keep the Torah now have, I wouldn't say permission, but the ability to govern things, if you will. The first word in the 5 books of Moses is Bereshit at first, and the last word is Israel. Bereshit Israel, God's thought initially was all for Israel. At first, there was Israel. And there is even a hint within the word Bereshit itself. I'll give you some fun stuff right now. Bereshit, Bet Reish Aleph Shin Yud Taf. Bet stands for Barishona, at first. Reish, Ra'ah, saw. Aleph, Elohim, God. Shin, Sheyekablu, would receive. Israel, Israel. Torah, the Torah. At first, meaning from creation itself, God saw that Israel would receive the Torah. Thank you. Furthermore, this also alludes to when God created the light. In Hebrew, et ha'or. Vayera Elohim et ha'or. Kitov, right? Et ha'or has the numerical value of 613. The light is the Torah, people. It's all over the place. You just have to know where to look. Which is why the next thing that the text in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says, and everyone who is wise and understands, he understands the molad of the moon and the generations of the children of men. And concerning them, the text says, and let them be for signs and for seasons. Genesis 1:14, who is wise? Oh, we could go with Daniel, and the wise will understand, but the wicked will not understand because they will pervert it and so on. But this specifically is referring to the only nation in the world who knows these times, who has been given these times. Deuteronomy 4:6, and you shall keep them and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the peoples, nations, who will hear all these statutes and say, only this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Teach us the signs and the times. How about we'll teach you about God's Torah, and then you yourself will see the signs and the times. Right? Okay. Our sages have said all over the Talmud and the Mishnah, Ezehu chacham haro'eh et hanolad. He who is wise can see that which is to come. It also means can see the outcome of his actions, but haro'eh et hanolad, nolad, molad, right? Same root. You see, if we understand God's times based on what he has given us, we can also change the negative outcomes because we know the times. It's like, we know that judgment is coming in T minus 5, 4, it's 2 minutes to midnight, it's 30 seconds to midnight, and so on and so forth. We can still change whatever we need to change because we know the times. For the nations, there is nothing they can do other than, brace, because the nations can also read the constellations very, very accurately, and yet they can't change anything. But for Israel, we have the power to actually change reality. So when we see calamity happening, it is only our fault because we are not doing what we need to be doing. And to answer your question, well, why don't we change reality? Because Israel today has no idea who we are, what we're truly capable of, and the world is making damn sure, yes, I said damn sure, to make sure that we don't know these things. Because if you understood what kind of power you actually possess, oy vey, yes, the Samech Mem himself would flee from you for reals. This is the price and the cost of living like the rest of the nations. This is why Israel does not see or does not understand anything. We want our government. We want our shopping malls. We want our Nike Air Jordans. Is that still a thing? I don't know. I wear boots. We have submitted ourselves to the powers that be instead of he who actually has the power. The signs of the hours shall not depart from serving the sun by day and the moon by night. In Hebrew, the words are otot halalu lo yimoshu. Otot, signs. Interestingly enough, otiyot, ot and ot. Ot is a letter and ot is a sign. Love it. These signs shall not cease, just like the letters from God's Torah. It is important to note where we see this word imoshu, right? Will never cease. So let's look at Jeremiah 31:35, but let's read 34 also for context. So Jeremiah 31:34, so says the Lord, who gives the sun to illuminate by day, the laws of the moon, and the stars to illuminate at night, who stirs up the sea, and its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. 35. If these laws depart before me, says the Lord, so will the seed of Israel cease being a nation before me for all time. In other words, if the sun and moon goes, Israel's going too. And we know that Israel ain't going nowhere, which means the sun and moon are staying exactly where they need to be. And of course, we have Joshua 1:8, and we'll also read verse 7 for context. Starting with 7, just be strong and very courageous too. Listen to me now, everybody who's listening. This is for you, to observe and do in accordance with all of the Torah that Moses, my servant, had commanded you. Do not stray there from right or left, meaning take your own understanding and flush it down the toilet. This will save your life, this one and the one to come, in order that you succeed wherever you go. You do this, wherever you go, you will succeed. Thus saith the Lord. Verse 8, this book of the Torah shall not leave your mouth. Lo yamush sefer haTorah ze mipicha vehagita bo yomam v'layla. You shall meditate it. Lehagot is to pronounce. You shall speak of it. You shall utter it. You shall concentrate on it. You shall focus on it. This shall be within your being day and night. Why? In order that you observe to do all that is written in it. The only way you can actually do what is written in it properly is if you immerse yourself in it. For then you will succeed in all your ways, and then you will prosper. Thank you, and thank you. And that's it. And so if we do not, whose fault is it? That's it. God's not trying to punish you. God's not trying to teach you nothing. This is very simple. God says, you do this, great success. If you don't, no, miserable failure. Oh, I don't know. Okay, you get it. Anyway, this is fact because it's all in the Torah. In 3 cycles of the sun or in 4 cycles of the moon, there are 84 years, which are 1 hour of the day of the Holy One, blessed be He. I'm going to read that again because I want people to be like, huh? What's that? In 3 cycles of the sun or in 4 cycles of the moon, there are 84 years. What are 84 years? 84 years are 1 hour of the day of the Holy One, blessed be He. Wait. Now, don't go losing your heads. See, I even wrote, don't go losing your heads. I am fully aware of Psalms 90, verse 4. For 1,000 years, all right, that's what everybody's thinking. I hope so. That's what I was thinking. For 1,000 years are in your eyes like yesterday, which passed, and a watch in the night. Ki elef shanim be'enecha keyom etmol, like a day yesterday. It's very specific. It says keyom etmol. Keyom, day, yesterday. But if you all look at it, it will make perfect sense. So this is what we're going to do. Since the revolutions of the moon are never full days, but rather 83.3 and change. And if we think that a day or a year for God, we have to take the literal daytime. It says keyom, not laila, keyom, which means 12 hours of the day. So now if you multiply, look at this beautiful. If you multiply 12 by 83.3, you will get 999.6. Now do 83.3 and change, you will get 1,000. There is your 1,000 years, okay? Day for God, 1,000 years. It's right there, okay? It's just the breakdown. When the sun and the moon become equal at the beginning of the eve of the fourth day, at the hour of Saturn, in the hour when they were created, and in the hour when the flames of the moon reach the sun by day, and the degree or ascent of 60 degrees it passes therein and extinguishes its light. And in the hour when the flames of the sun reach the moon at night, in the degree or ascent of 40 degrees, it passes through it and extinguishes its light. Let's just leave what we just read without getting into it and just say, sure, thank you very much for the info. Also, some of you guys have said, listen, I've listened to these things 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Wow, Baruch Hashem, good for you, okay? You know, it's a lot of stuff, but if you miss something, because especially now it's very, very technical, don't worry about that. Again, we're going to learn about this, and then we're going to obviously get into things, the familiar stories from the Torah that we are very familiar with. So don't worry about this. If there's something you don't understand specifically, you can send me an email, but really don't dwell on this, okay? This is ridiculously heavy stuff, okay? People spend a lifetime learning just this topic. You don't need to do this right now. Right now, you need to be a sponge, consume as much as possible. I promise you only because God says this. When you get this, the wisdom that you get, this is all wisdom right now, God will give you the understanding and everything will click. Go through it. Receive it right now. You could listen once or twice, but don't get caught up on this. In other words, don't listen. I'd rather you not listen to the teaching 3, 4, 5 times instead of reading the Torah for yourself. That won't help you. Listen once or twice if you miss something, and then move on. Questions, email me, okay? But I don't want you to stop and focus on this you get it. Okay, let's go on. Rabbi Nehorai says, the king has decreed in a famous or renowned word. What is famous? Or rather, what is the definition of famous? Known about by many people. Simple. Okay. When God created an eclipse, God causes an eclipse, this is something that is known by many people. During the time when Israel sins, first of all, everyone knows when Israel sins. How do we know when Israel sins? When bad things happen in the world, that means Israel are not doing their jobs. I know, and this is true. How do I know this is true? Because this is true. Because this is what we read all throughout the Torah. When Israel are not in Israel, that means that Israel sinned. If you do good, read the Shema. If you do good, you will be in the land, and the plenty and the growth and all the long lives, everything is good. But when you sinned, you're going to get out of the land. And now, when we have a chance to come back to the land, we're not coming back into the land. You think that is good before the eyes of the Lord? Obviously not. We are currently breaking Torah. This is why I say openly right now, I have beef. I have beef with my Jewish brethren living all over the world by choice. I'm not talking about you guys who are clawing at the doors to come in. God help you. I mean, seriously, we're praying that God will help you come in. We're talking about people who are planting roots in the States or in the UK, which, again, these places will no longer be. You're doing all these things right now when you can easily come to Israel as a Jew and establish yourself here, still with your small fortunes. I got problems with this because I read about this. I'm not preaching to anybody. I lived in the States plenty myself. But once you wake up to these things, you're like, oh, Gewalt, how can this be? How can they be building communities over there? For what purpose? For what purpose? No one is aware. Anyway, getting off topic. I'm sorry. It's just it upsets me. But this because of this and many other things, obviously, that are also happening in Israel, this is why the world looks the way it does. And so when Israel sins, Zedavar mefulsam, as Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says. So during the time when Israel sins, right, what does it mean, lachto? Lachto is, you shoot somebody, chatati, aviti, pashati. Lachto means to miss. You missed the mark. Too much, too little, not at all, and so on my own understanding, whatever. Bottom line, not what God said. Very simple. If you do to the best of your ability what God said and you miss, God will move the target that you should hit it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, right? Make your crooked paths straight. So when Israel sins and they fail to intercalate the year properly, the word in Hebrew is ibul, which means conception. So we have learned that every 19 years, the small cycle, there are 7 years of conception, which on average around 2.71 years in total of the 19 years. These years are given to us in order to bring peace and connection between the sun and the moon, as it was when they were first created, right? Why have we been created? To rectify creation, lasot tikkun olam. When we fail to do that, at the time when the flame of the sun reaches the moon by night 40 degrees, then the Holy One, blessed be He, darkens the moon and hides one of the Sanhedrin. Everything I just said corroborated right here, in addition to everywhere else, since Israel are likened to the moon when God darkens the moon in the form of an eclipse. This is God concealing Israel from due judgment. But this is not done yet. It's not done here. The word for hides in this specific case is gonez, from the word geniza. What is geniza? Treasures, holy things that you bury, whether it's books, holy writings, tefillin, talis that, let's say, gets ripped, even Torah scrolls that are beyond repair. We treat them as one of Israel and we give them a proper burial in the ground. So when God gonez one of the Sanhedrin, what does it mean, one of the Sanhedrin? Do we have a Sanhedrin today? No. Meaning one of the tzaddikim that are actually keeping Israel alive. That means this holy man is now taken and kept for the sake of giving Israel another opportunity, right? This is a mercy within itself. This is what happens. When Israel sins, everyone knows about it. And the signs are right there in the sky. Blood red moons, anybody? Hey, not over Israel this time, over Africa and America. When Israel does the will of the Holy One, blessed be He, in His great mercy He makes the sun dim and He sends forth His anger upon the nations of the world. The sun representing the nations of the world, right? Israel, moon, sun, nations. So when you put all this together, we understand from the commentator Par Echad that when the sun is eclipsed, it is bad for the nations, and when the moon is eclipsed, it is very specifically bad for those who hate Israel, right? Nature, which is the Hateva, the Gematria of Elohim, punishes the nations, gets on the nations, right? But when the nations are out of line, but when Israel are out of line, God doesn't send nature, He sends the nations. And that's what happens, i.e. anti-Semitism. We've been through this already 1,000 times. As it said, thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the nations, and be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven. Meaning, okay, so there's an eclipse, there's this, there's that, blood moon. Don't worry about it, for the nations are dismayed at them. You, Israel, be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven, for the nations are dismayed at them. Do not be as the nations in any way, shape, or form. Not even what they are afraid of. Do not. Jeremiah 10:2. You are above this. It all depends how much credence you give to it. You could tell the signs and you can change these signs. You can change these times. Israel. If Israel remembers everything that God does is for the sake of Israel. Astrologers said, what? The whole world freaks out while Israel should be like, while y'all focus on the stars, our eyes are on he who made them, ideally speaking. And so, we are not dismayed, or should not be. Just as the moon's light does not rule over the sun's light by day, nor does the sun's light rule over the moon's light by night. Likewise, the calculations of the moon does not rule by day, nor does the calculation of the sun obtain by night. And the one does not trespass on the boundary of the other. Learning boundaries and boundaries and boundaries. Topography can change. We've seen topography change, right? Just like it has over the course of time as well. But this once again reminds us that these luminaries have been placed there and cannot be touched. But again, Joshua stopped them in the middle of the sky. Why? He's doing the Lord's work, right? So Israel has the power to do these things. They represent so much more than just the sun and the moon, day and night, but also times and seasons, Israel and the nations. The dwelling of the moon is in between cloud and thick darkness. We continue. This is likened to the dwelling place, if you will, of God, or the throne of glory that is surrounded by cloud and thick darkness. The words are anan, cloud. We also learned what it was, av, ein bet, 72. It's another reference to a cloud, very specific clouds. So in here, it's anan and arafel. As in, Vayishkon kvod Hashem al har Sinai, vaychaseu ha'anan sheshet yamim, vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan. And the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And he called to Moses on the 7th day from within the cloud. Exodus 24:16. And then Solomon said, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness. Az amar Shlomo, Adonai amar lishkon ba'arafel. So here we see anan and arafel. This is in 1 Kings 8:12. Or both of them together. When I made the clouds its raiment and the dark cloud its wrapping. Bishumi anan levusho va'arafel chatulato. Chatulato, its wrapping. Chatul is cat in Hebrew. Why is a cat called a cat? Ki hu mechatel et atzmo. Chitul means diaper, right? Cats clean themselves, right? It's all part of the same thing. That's why the cat is called the cat. Ki hu mechatel et atzmo. Chatul mechatel. Okay. So anyway, we just read the dwelling of the moon is in between the cloud and the thick darkness, which is likened to the dwelling place of God. Made like two dishes, turned one over the other. It says gavel gav, back to back. And when it is the conjunction of the moon, these two clouds turn to the east quarter and the moon goes forth from between them like a ram's horn, a shofar. Now, these two clouds have different sizes also because one wraps around the other. So this is likened to a shofar because one is big and one is small. The clouds are not equal sizes, like we said, especially if one is around the other, then they cannot be. For instance, the shofar that we blow, why is it likened to the shofar? The shofar that we blow today, here we go. This shofar is called shofar katan. Not that even the big shofarot are called shofar katan. That's not what we're talking about, okay? From Isaac's ram in the beginning, 2 horns, 2 shofarot. We got the small horn, but when God will blow the shofar gadol, that is at the final redemption. We even say it in the Amidah. Tekaba shofar gadol lecherutenu v'sanes lekabetz galuyotenu, right? Blow the large or big shofar lecherutenu to commemorate our freedom. And then kabetz galuyotenu, lekabetz, gather all our exiles. On the first night is revealed one measure of light, on the second night the second measure, and so on until the half of the month when the moon is fully revealed, and from the middle of the month these two clouds turn their faces to the easterly wind. So Safaria says the west quarter instead of the easterly wind. So probably because of the direction it blows from, which is how you usually refer to these things. Again, they're not true to the text, it's a problem, but meaning it's an easterly wind. An easterly wind doesn't blow to the east, it blows from the east, right? A westerly wind blows from the west, okay? So in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it's very specifically saying easterly wind, because it comes from the east towards the west. the corner, i.e. crescent of the moon, with which it comes forth first, the same begins to enter and is covered therein by the two clouds, on the first night by one measure, on the second night by the second measure, and so on until the end of the month, until it is entirely covered. And whence do we know that it is placed between two clouds? Because it is said, when I made the cloud and garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, Job 38:9. You gotta love it when the sages confirm what you're thinking. So like while I'm writing this, I'm bringing these examples of where, again, like I said, I'm putting, for every like one line written, I write a page, okay? Now I'm trying to scrunch it down because it will be here forever. So you bring in these things, I'm like, wow, so it actually says it together in Job, and then further down they say it. So yay, it's good. I like it's a good feeling. This is, by the way, how you know that you're right on. Because if you come up with a theory, and no sage of these great sages of the 2,000-year history that there have been sages, and even before that, have not seen this before, example, who some people think Messiah is, right? So if the sages didn't see it, then it's not true. Then you're off base. Not everyone is wrong, or no one else saw it except for you. As Solomon said, Ein chadash tachat hashemesh, u'ma she'ayahu ze she'yeh, which also spells out Moses. So please let us not begin to think that, oh, we are special. That's ego. That is the opposite of Moses. Moses knew that he was nobody, which is why God filled him with him and he spoke directly through him. And whence do we know that it becomes entirely covered? Because it is said, blow ye the trumpet in the new moon, in the covering of the solemn feast day. Psalms 81:4. So, תיקחו בחוד השופר, בכסה ליום חגנו, כי חוק לישראל הוא משפט לאלוהי יעקב, right? Safaria says 81:8 for some reason, but that's just wrong. It's 81:4. At the covering, on the day when it is entirely covered, blow ye the trumpet in the new moon. And that is our teaching for today. Yeah, we got through it. Okay, so stick around for next week. Thank you again very much for being here this week, of course. Stick around for next week. We will be discussing the conception, the Ibul, with additions of the Torah. We're going to be discussing what the characters in the Bible actually did during these times, all the way up to the coming of Mashiach. So more fun stuff, a little bit less technical, a little bit more technical in the beginning, but as we go on, it'll be more relatable. Anyway, as always, thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the week and have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye.